And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this 10th day of July 2023. Hi, it's wonderful to be back. After spending a weekend in Melbourne. Melbourne was good, but Brisbane is home, so there's no place like home, as they mentioned. Yes, it is beautiful, and it's so glad to be back. 17 degrees and sunny in Brisbane as we embark on this week. So let's take a look at what's making news today. First of all, news in brief.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has touched down in Germany ahead of his trip to the NATO summit. Mr Albanese will witness the signing of an in-principle agreement for Australia to supply over 100 Boxer combat vehicles to Germany from 2025. It's worth more than $1 billion to the economy. The Prime Minister is also meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz for talks in Berlin.
The federal government has this morning announced a starting date for a new national exclusion register for problem gamblers. BetStop will launch on the 21st of August. Under the scheme, people will be able to opt in to prevent themselves from having access to online gambling.
Australians who are experiencing online gambling harms will have this opportunity to self-exclude, similar in the way that they are currently able to self-exclude themselves from licensed venues, for example.
A 22-year-old sailor who was rescued in the Great Australian Bight over the weekend has thanked those who came to his aid. Xavier Doa was rescued by an Indonesian cargo ship on Saturday afternoon after his sailboat struck rough weather and capsized. He's waiting on the results of scans on his head and spine.
Those news in detail. Well, right now, first of all, that Boxer combat vehicles that Australia is going to supply to Germany.
The Prime Minister is set to sign one of the biggest defence sales in Australia's history on his visit to Germany ahead of the NATO summit. Mr Albanese has just arrived in the capital, Berlin, where he's expected to witness the signing of an in-principle agreement for Australia to supply over 100 Boxer combat vehicles to Germany. They're being made in Brisbane and will roll out from 2025.
It's set to be worth more than $1 billion to the economy. The Prime Minister is also meeting with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz for talks later today. I spoke to our Europe Bureau Chief Steve Kinane, he's in the German capital, and began by asking him what was on the PM's agenda.
The big thing is he's meeting with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. That's happening within the next 24 hours. They'll be discussing energy policy, defence procurement, and also security in Europe. So in terms of what we're really talking about is the war in Ukraine. One of the key things we think from the indications we're getting is that we're discussing what is known as the Climate Club, and that Australia is potentially going to be invited to join that and may well sign up to that. That is an alliance of nations who are committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It was started last year. It's led by Germany, and who knows, within the next 24 hours we may see Australia sign up to that while Anthony Albanese is in Berlin. We also know that the Prime Minister is going to be witness to an agreement that he says will give around $1 billion to the Australian economy. What we're talking about here is vehicles, heavy carrier army vehicles that are going to be sold to the German army. Apparently that is going to lead to jobs in Queensland and across the country. The Prime Minister says it's going to lead to a number of well-paid jobs, and it'll be a great thing for the economy. He's going to be there when that announcement is made there in the next 24 hours as well.
Steve, Ukraine, as you say, is always front and centre for these sort of talks. There is a push to have Ukraine eventually join NATO, but that appears to be meeting some resistance from Germany. What's going on there?
Well, we expect this to dominate the agenda at the NATO conference, which is in Lithuania on Tuesday and Wednesday, and Germany and the US seem to be resisting Ukraine getting a pathway to membership. Of course, Ukraine can't join NATO at the moment because its borders are contested and they're in the middle of a war after Russia launched their full-scale invasion. But what they want is some kind of pathway to membership. Now, a lot of countries support that. Even Turkey supports it, Britain supports it, the Baltic nations, Poland supports it. But Germany and the US are resistant to it. And there's a feeling that there are concerns that if Ukraine was given some kind of pathway to membership, that could lead to further escalations from Vladimir Putin. So we expect that to really dominate the agenda on Tuesday and Wednesday in Vilnius, and there may be some kind of compromised reach where perhaps Ukraine doesn't get that pathway to membership, but they get some kind of security guarantees from many Western nations in the meantime.
Ukraine's membership to NATO maybe conditional or maybe just a pathway as it's been opposed by Germany and US. Well, right now, one of the things that was talked about in that report was building of those box hospitals right here in Brisbane. So that's good news for Brisbane, that it will be adding to the economy here. But once again, supplying of army things and things that are made for combat. One day we will probably see that we don't need things like that. That day might come. Well, right now, moving on for the next news, a biographer is helping children suffering from cancer to reclaim their lives. How is that been happening?
Now it's actually gone curly now.
Deep in conversation, 16-year-old Summer Williams and her volunteer biographer, Claire Davis, leave no subject untouched.
Did your dad enjoy doing that too?
He was getting blood.
After years of treatment for a rare aggressive brain cancer, the Sydney teen is receiving palliative care. She signed up to the Story Project, a free program that provides people like Summer the chance to record their story.
This is my family tree. I actually found it therapeutic, sort of reliving some of the things actually made things make more sense, make me realise what I've actually been through.
Trained biographers are matched with the family. Over 8 sessions at hospital or at their home, they ask questions, interview those closest to her, and transform it into a book.
The pets, that's right.
I got to choose all the designs for it, so I was happy that it had ended up pretty much what I had envisioned.
The biography is full of stories, photos and messages from loved ones.
So that's Mum's message, Dad's message, and my medical timeline.
Summer's so much more than the medical story, and sometimes, that overwhelms so much. It's really good to stand back and actually look at the whole life.
While hospital visits continue, Summer's mum says the program and the book have been a gift.
It just gave us as a family an opportunity to just touch on things that you probably normally wouldn't just bring up on a daily basis.
The biography service was initially just offered to adults receiving palliative care, but its success convinced this hospital network to make the service available for children and their families. It's a service Sydney Children's Hospitals hope to provide to all families who are ready.
It's an idea that sort of resonates with some, but not with others.
A book that's both a therapy and a legacy. Harriet Tatum, ABC News.
Isn't that just so wonderful, trying to help someone in that condition, and the heart goes out to someone going through that condition. So anything that can be done to help and ease the pain of that situation is always welcome. Well, right now, another welcome news is another sailor who was rescued from the sea when his yacht capsized. Apparently, it hit something from underneath, a big starfish or something, and he's very grateful to be alive and thanks everyone who helped with the assistance of getting him up.
Xavier Doa takes one last look at the freighter that saved his life. Picked up from the bulk carrier Theodore JR, then reaching dry land at last.
I'm feeling a lot better than I was 48 hours ago. It was extremely treacherous conditions, and I'm very grateful that all the amazing people in the process were able to do what they did to get me back.
A pit stop in Port Lincoln before the 22-year-old was flown to hospital in Adelaide with neck and back pain.
Part of our treatment was some pain relief, and further to that, a coffee was definitely on the treatment plan.
On Friday, Mr. Doa's 6-metre sailboat struck rough weather and an object in the remote Great Australian Bight.
Surfing down a wave and I collided with what I believe was a sunfish underwater, which caused me to capsize and subsequently have a strong impact with my head.
The solo adventurer's distress call sparked an air and sea search before he was rescued by the Indonesian crew of a bulk carrier, a daring effort that nearly failed.
He's pretty sore, but he's actually quite lucky he isn't more severely injured.
Mr. Doa set out from the Gold Coast almost 2 months ago, but had to give up on his attempt to break a speed record circumnavigating Australia when his boat was damaged off WA. After repairs in Perth, the whole plan was finally scuppered more than 600 kilometres west of Kangaroo Island, with at least 4 aircraft and 2 ships coming to his aid.
His choices will be one for him, but as always, the first responding agencies right across the country have done an outstanding job.
We're talking about a very experienced young man, a very experienced sailor.
Mr. Doa now hopes to be reunited with his family and his prized 6-metre sailboat.
I'll definitely be back out sailing again one day soon. I'm not sure if we'll be in that boat, but I am, very grateful.
An experience this adventurer will never forget. Bethany Alderson.
And isn't that wonderful that Indonesian bulk carrier could come to the rescue, being closest and picking up on that SOS signal. Well, right now to the next news, where we look at a migrant couple who spent 50 years record indigenous culture.
Out of the archives, a never-before-seen slice of traditional life. This film has sat in storage since 1960, and it shows a culture at the crossroads. It was recorded by 2 Austrian academics who were given rare access to communities on Mornington Island in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Even 63 years on, island elders can connect to what they see. Stephen and Helen Verm spent half a century travelling through northern Australia, helping protect Indigenous custom and language from the tightening grip of the White Australia policy. Helen was an anthropologist who collected more than 1,000 cultural works for national institutions.
It's got the same, I'd say, rainbow serpent design. She says herself, I think, that she felt very privileged. This little old white lady feeling so privileged that they would entrust her with their, sacred knowledge.
Professor Stephen Verm was a talented linguist who sat, recorded and translated dozens of endangered languages across the Asia-Pacific.
Mornington Island, September 1960.
He was such a polyglot. He knew so many languages. He knew possibly as many as 50 languages. To me, it was unbelievable.
With traditional life under threat from assimilation, Aboriginal communities could have met these outsiders with suspicion, but the Verms worked to earn their trust.
Because they could feel the winds of change and they needed to pass it on beyond their own for survival of the culture purposes.
Against creeping pressure from white society, they helped empower Aboriginal people to speak up.
What they were always saying is that, you're unique, you're precious, you have something to tell the world.
After their deaths 2 decades ago, the Verms' massive catalogue of photos, notebooks and films was donated to the Australian National University. Their life's work not only gave Aboriginal people a voice, but ensured the world could hear it. Craig Allen, ABC News, Canberra.
And another wonderful story in recording all those clips and voices translated and then kept in record. Amazing work. And I can relate to that. I too love collecting and keeping. I hate deleting old clips and things because I thought one day it might be useful to someone, or the information contained could be a vital piece of history one day.
They're Victoria's flagship big build projects, and they're bringing in big bucks for bosses.
This is one of the biggest public transport projects anywhere in our nation.
A leaked report obtained by the Herald Sun has found 16 out of 25 of the state's top road and rail executives were paid more than the recommended salary cap last year, including the chief executive of Rail Projects Victoria, who earned more than $800,000, almost $50,000 more than recommended, while the executive general manager of the Suburban Rail Loop earned an extra $170,000. The government says the high salaries are needed to compete with the private sector and deal with a skills shortage.
It's about making sure that we've got the right people to fill those roles to get these projects done.
But those projects, such as the Metro Tunnel and Westgate Tunnel, remain billions over budget.
You've got fat cats being paid sometimes 11 times more than the average wage. And yet, what are Victorian taxpayers getting for it? They're getting cost overruns, cost blowouts.
With the government also set to cut thousands of public sector jobs in order to rein in the state's debt, the public sector union says it's setting a double standard, especially as other fields such as youth justice and child protection struggle to attract workers.
This is a market. People with highly sought after skills and capability are able to go from one project to another, and we've got to compete in that market.
Up to 4,000 public servants face the sack. Leanne Wong, ABC News, Melbourne.
There you go. There's some crazy amounts of wages being paid to some of those CEOs of the major infrastructure and construction companies looking after those very critical projects, though. Well, in Australia, we always talk about the mortgage and the mortgage rates, but did you know that Australia does not have a 30-year fixed loan?
Last month and this month are when the largest number of fixed-rate loans switched to variable rate, increasing the repayments on the average mortgage by about $2,000 a month. It's called the mortgage cliff. So this might be a good time to ask how come Australians don't have 30-year fixed-rate mortgages like Americans do. They know what their rate's going to be for the entire term of the loan. So how come we don't have that? Well, the answer can be found almost 100 years ago. By a quirk of fate, when the Great Depression arrived in 1930, Australia had a Labor government led by Jim Scullin, and America had a Republican or Conservative president, Herbert Hoover. Any government in power when unemployment goes to 30% is going to be chucked out. And so they both were. So, in 1932, in the depths of the Great Depression, Australia got the Conservative Joe Lyons and America got the Democrat FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In 1938, as part of his New Deal, FDR created the Federal National Mortgage Association, later nicknamed Fannie Mae, to buy mortgages from the banks so they could offer 30-year fixed-rate loans. Joe Lyons did not. He died in office in 1939 and was replaced by Bob Menzies, who was no more interested in new deals and 30-year fixed-rate mortgages than Joe Lyons was. And when Menzies lost to Labor's John Curtin in 1941, we were at war and the moment had passed. Fannie Mae is still there, later joined by Freddie Mac and Ginnie Mae, and they provide banks with the liquidity and guarantees needed to lend at fixed rates for 30 years. And they are beloved institutions in the United States. But we don't have them, thanks to Joe Lyons and Bob Menzies. And that's why our fixed-rate loans max out at 5 years, and why we've got a mortgage cliff over which our economy is now driving. Maybe we could do with a new deal.
Definitely, wouldn't that be wonderful? I mean, looking at what America did is if you got a 30-year loan, you know what you will be repaying for the whole of that 30 years, not be subject to the fluctuations and the market conditions, the CPIs, the interest rates rise and falls. Wouldn't that be a very good way of planning and being certain about the future? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you today. We'll bring to you all the functions and events back from tomorrow. Hey, it's going to be wonderful to be back and having your company once again. Well, right now it's time to say goodbye from this.